Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Poketown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code, Omnipoke. For today's video, we're going to be looking at the Day 1 and 2 meta, as well as the top 8 breakdown for the Utrecht special event. It was the last Paradox Rift legal tournament in Europe, and there's still 2 more to go. There's this weekend, one in Brazil, as well as Vancouver in a couple of weeks' time. So there are definitely still people trying to get points in this meta, which I completely respect. I didn't actually attend Utrecht myself. It's the first tournament that I've had off this year, either playing or casting, so happy to stay at home and do some post-rotation testing myself. But let's have a look at the Day 1 breakdown of deck lists, where Roaring Moon was actually the most popular Day 1 archetype. Now, there is an asterisk towards this Day 1 meta because it was a special event, and I think around 200 or so players who were registered didn't actually end up attending the tournament, so they may have just locked in a deck list just to put themselves into the tournament. So we know that the Day 1 meta isn't that reliable, but the Day 2 meta should be obviously very reliable. As you see, the unclassified here is that 8%. That's because people could have submitted any old list, like one Pokemon and 59 energy dot list, just to get themselves into the tournament, and then actually ended up dropping and not changing that deck list. So obviously the vast majority of players were changing up their deck list for the ones actively looking to play in the event. So there is still some reliability towards these numbers, with Roaring Moon, Giratina, Charizard all being some of the most popular archetypes, and slightly below that is Gardevoir and Lost Zone Box, which isn't all that surprising. The Roaring Moon being possibly the most popular deck is slightly surprising. We've seen Tina and Charizard be vying for best deck in format contention. Roaring Moon probably being the best easy deck to play in the game right now. Very aggressive, very fast. Its metagame position isn't fantastic, but it can just bully other archetypes and at least gets to play 3 games into a lot of matchups. So that is a selling point of the archetype right now. As for the rest of Day 1, Chien-Pao getting a small resurgence after its victory at the previous regional championships. Miraidon still with 7%. Mew in at that 6%. Obviously has to be a little bit concerned with the amount of Roaring Moon upticking. So Mew is a sort of risky deck to play, but as we know, it has a very high power level, and we will be seeing it in the top 8. Goldengo, again, having a second place finish at the previous event means it had a small uptick, with Rapid Strike and Iron Valiant variants sort of rounding things out. As we get onto the conversion, Gardevoir doing quite well, obviously enjoys Roaring Moon being popular in the field, but Roaring Moon actually held its own as well, with 15% in that Day 2. Charizard and Tina sort of retaining their percentages as well. Lost Zone Box also doing pretty well, and Mew VMAX creeping up in those percentages. As we know, it's a very solid deck, and it's going to take rotation to actually stop this archetype by the looks of things. As for the best of the rest, Day 2, Miraidon doing okay, again retaining its percentage. The Chien-Paos didn't do all that well despite a small uptick in Day 1 popularity. Then we have some 1 and 2 percenters from Palkia and Arceus decks, but it's really not a big deal. Actually, looking from the Limitless data, the unclassified category from the graphic that we saw from the official stream may have just been Snorlax, honestly, because there's 7 of them that was in the Day 2. So yeah, it could just be Stall that had 8% Day 1 of the field and 7% conversion, so pretty much 1-to-1. And yeah, is obviously still a threat in the metagame, but does have to dodge and weave some popular matchups right now. Just a quick note before we get into the deck list, and a huge congratulations to Owen Kammerman, who's been able to win back-to-back tournaments with 2 separate archetypes. A really, really big achievement. I think off the top of my head, Andrew Hedrick's the last person to do this, and it really is a monster accomplishment. So difficult to have such a great run over 2 different tournaments, especially when you're switching up decks as well completely. This time opting to play the Mew VMAX variant, going with the fusion build, which I think makes sense if you're expecting lots of Roaring Moon. You have to have some sort of prize offset here, so your opponent can't simply get through to VMAX as their map. You try and make them take that single prize attacker, and in that case, if you're taking 2 prizes every single turn, you will be able to win that race, which is fantastic. Has the classic counts of Box of Disaster, Lost Cities in here as well, and by also playing the Fusion Strike Energy, you're protecting yourself a little bit against Spiritomb, which is showing up in a number of Tina decks at the very least, so yeah, definitely worth respecting. You really never can write off the Mew players. It's a very consistent performer, especially here in Europe, so yeah, another big dub for the Mew deck. Interestingly, it was a Roaring Moon that got 2nd place, and it's a pretty aggressive build, to be honest with you, with the full suite of 4 copies of Pokemon Catcher, as well as 4 copies of Trekking Shoes. You don't often see counts that high in the deck list, and it has got the Quad E-Switch plus Water package for Moonlight Shuriken players, so slightly different from the Cawthorn based build. Still is taking on that sort of supporter engine where you have a few one-offs and the Palpad, but is incorporating Water to have that spread pressure from Moonlight Shuriken, which is definitely justifiable. Tor did manage a top 4, but that has to wait till the end of the video because that's when you're going to want to stick around for. We've got Chien-Pao also in top 4, so again, another really good placement. It didn't do all that well kind of in the field, but a couple of them squeezed tweak through to deep placements. Not too different from Owen's list from the previous week. I think just switching up the basics, honestly, is the only changes going on in the list. So technically there were 3 Charizard decks in the top 8, but they all were vastly different. Bolly was playing a barrel engine, which we haven't seen for a while, with a double TM evolution, that quad Arven in the list as well. Bolly opting not to really have any like mirror tech tool cards either, just the Vitality Band in here for a damage mod. Sometimes you see Defiance, sometimes you see Choice as well to help out against Tina. But Bolly simply committing space to a thick barrel package to get multiple stage 1s in the mix early with the double Charmeleon as well. Oscar's build was much more traditional, I guess you could say, when you're looking at the Pidgeot approach, except the choice of playing Jet Energy and Roxanne, which we see a lot in Japan. Actually, I've been seeing that post-rotation quite often over the Research, which you see a lot in Standard. Those are the real standout cards, but other than that, again, it's more of the same. We've had this format for a long time. It's difficult to find new innovations at this stage, but there are still some interesting cards making their way into the list. Alessandro Bax was able to get top 8 with a Pidgeot build of Snorlax with the attacking suite. The double turbos can take out certain threats when required. It also gives you the Fang Snipe option. The Fire Energy unlocks Radiant Charizard as an attacking threat, as well as the Chi-Yu. It's got a really interesting lineup of stadiums within the list as well. Does allow you to possibly burst a Charizard on the scene when your opponent may not expect it, but also that Calamitous Wasteland adding towards your stalling options, allowing you to more safely Chi-Yu or Fang Snipe during the game, which I think is pretty cool. Obviously, this is the more sort of box of tricks approach compared to just the quad Snorlax builds without the Pidgeot. So I do think this has more flexible lines of play available to it, and it's cool to see it getting a high placement. And then rounding out the top 8, we have a pretty straightforward Giratina list from Brent Hermans. And then we end on towards Abomination. It really is just a combination of cards that he likes as well as cards that are good. So many lines of play that he can take against all sorts of matchups that your opponent obviously can never expect, certainly in a game 1 situation. You have a 2/0/2 Charizard package, you have a 101 Pidgeot for the quick search, so you have good dark type coverage for a number of matchups and late game superiority with that fantastic Burning Darkness as you work towards those later stages. You also have the Barrel Squover in here, so you can cycle through the deck naturally and see more cards as you go. You have another rare candy option with the Inteleon Quick Shooting, which can sometimes push your Charizard into better range, but over a few turns that Quick Shooting can also push things like Radiant Charizard. It can push your Medicham to have Yoga Loop plays available to it, and it also makes a tempting trap game plan not necessarily required to be permanent, because you can also get Quick Shooting value throughout the game. Then we got Todd's favourite, the 1/1 Urshifu, as well as a Thorson package in here as well. What I think is quite cool and synergistic about the deck list actually is that when you are using Infernal Rain to pull 3 energy out, no one would ever bat an eyelid of an energy floating onto a Mew, a Manaphy, a Jirachi, any of these sorts of Pokemon, but floating that energy opens up the line for you to Thornton into VMAX, attach a Rapid Strike energy and get a Gmax Rapid Flow out of nowhere. So many like pitfalls you can put your opponent in, because they of course have no idea what's going on when they start seeing all these Pokemon hit the field. It's hilarious to see Todd try and jam some semblance of consistency in here, but the supporter line really is wild. I definitely don't think anyone should take this deck list going into the final few weeks of the tournament, even though this is really cool. Todd is basically just styling on us at this point. I wasn't able to attend the event myself, so he's just played Cube day 1 and 2 by the looks of things. I obviously do love this creativity, and there is something to be said about having surprise factor on your side in long best of 1 sets, but at the same time, getting into games is pretty good. Let me know your thoughts down below. How long of a prison sentence should Todd serve for this heinous crime? I'll hear it all down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.